Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Beis Amud Beis, 6 lines from the top. In regard to the machloikis, whether we say Toye b'dvar mitzvah, ve'osa mitzvah is going to be chayiv or potter from a korban chatos, our Mishnah makes a distinction. It says when a person takes a korban like a korban shlomim, and he then designates it to be a korban pesach, so it depends. If it's something that is considered to be einom ru'uyin, that means that the animal itself would not be shaykh to be a korban pesach, then everybody, including Rabbi Yoshua, would say he's chayiv a korban chatos. However, if it's something that is ru'uyin, the animal was like an animal of a korban pesach, that means that it is going to be either a eiz or a keves, either a goat or a lamb that is male and of the first year, then indeed it's a machlokes. According to Rabbi Eliezer, even though it's tall bidvar mitzvah va'osa mitzvah, he's going to be chayiv. But Rabbi Yoshua argues and says tall bidvar mitzvah va'osa mitzvah is going to be potter. The Gemara brings this quotation of the Mishnah: Ushar kol hazvachim, all other korbanos, like for example korban shlomim sheshachtan l'shum pesach, which is then used, designated as a korban pesach, im einan ru'uyin chayiv. Everybody agrees if it's not going to be fitting for a korban pesach, then it is going to be chayiv a korban chatos. However, v'im ru'uyin, Rabbi Eliezer mechayiv, Rabbi Yoshua poter. The Gemara now asks, man tano deshani le bein ru'uyin l'shein ru'uyin. Which is the tano that makes this distinction between an animal, a korban shlomim, that is going to be ru'uyin or not ru'uyin as a korban pesach? Rabbi Shimon, he answers the Gemara, it's Rabbi Shimon, and it proves from the following brayse, the Tanyo. Echad hazvachim haru'uyin ve'echad zvachim she'enan ru'uyin, whether it's a korban that is going to be ru'uyin to be a korban pesach or not, v'chein hashaychit l'shem emurei tzibur, or it's an animal that is going to be used to be brought as a korban tzibur. That means that it's his own personal offering, and he's shechting it l'shem korban tzibur, potter. Div Rabbi Meir. In fact, we learned that Rabbi Meir says even in that latter case, if he already shechted the korban tamid for a korban tzibur on Shabbos, and then brought his own personal korban, even then he's going to be potter from a korban chatos. And the chiddush, of course, is that he no longer needs to fulfill the mitzvah. It should be obvious. Nonetheless, according to Rabbi Meir, since he now has his korban, his personal korban, and that was on his mind, that he was torud in that mitzvah of the korban for several days now. So even after he brings the korban tamid, and now he shechs his own korban for the korban tamid, which should be known again that it was already brought and is unnecessary. Nonetheless, since he's torud, he's going to be considered to be potter according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir also adds in the first case that whether it's ru'uyin or einan ru'uyin, that also is considered to be enough to be considered to be toye bidvar mitzvah. Rabbi Shimon, however, Rabbi Shimon is arguing, Lo nechleku Rabbi Yeshua al she'einan ru'uyin shechayiv. But here we have our Tana that says Rabbi Shimon says that they're not arguing in the case where it is einan ru'uyin, because that everybody should know cannot be brought as a korban pesach, so therefore not considered to be toye bidvar mitzvah, whereby even Rabbi Yoshua agrees that he's going to be chayiv a korban chatos. Al manechleku, Rabbi Shimon goes on to say, what is the machlokes between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer? Al haru'uyin, Rabbi Eliezer mechayiv chant Rabbi Yoshua poiter, only on that animal that is similar to, that can be brought as a korban pesach. Specifically, again, either a goat or a lamb that is male and 1 year old. Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said the name of Rabbi Elazar. He explained the sheet of Rabbi Meir. The sheet of Rabbi Shimon. Poiter hayo Rabbi Meir. I'm sorry, going back. It is going to explain the sheet of Rabbi Meir. Poiter hayo Rabbi Meir. Afilu egil shel zivchei shlomim sheshachtu l'shum haPesach. that Reb Meir goes so far as to say not only, like we said before, but he's coming to then emphasize, not only that which is not ru'uyin as a korban pesach, let's say a korban shlomim, that you might think until now would be only if it's just merely a female or a 2-year-old, which is not so obvious. But comes along Rabbi Bibi and then Rabbi Elazar to explain that no, Rabbi Meir says even if it's going to be an egel, which is obvious that cannot be brought as a korban pesach, it's certainly not a lamb or a goat, still that's considered to be toyeh b'dvar mitzvah, since it is his personal korban and it's on his mind that he's obligated to bring it. If he makes a mistake and still brings such an animal as a korban pesach, he'll be potter from a korban chatos. Omar l'Rav Zeira l'Rab Bibi. He challenged Rabbi Bibi and he says, "Omar Rabbi Yochanan moida haya Rabbi Meir bebalei mumin." That Rabbi Yochanan explained the sheet of Rabbi Meir to say that if it's balei mumin, those animals, if he would bring such a korban, he would be yes chayiv a korban chatos. Even Rabbi Meir, who was more mekil in his definition as toyeh b'dvar mitzvah, he would say that a bal mum certainly is going to be chayiv. So too over here, since it's obvious that it's another animal, namely it's an egel, a calf, which cannot be brought as a korban pesach, certainly Rabbi Meir should be agreeing that he'd be chayiv a korban chatas, is not considered to be toyeh b'dvar mitzvah. Omar lei. So Rabbi Bibi answers back, bebalei mumin loy torid behu v'hai torid be. When it comes to balei mumin, the owner is not going to be torud because he understands that bal mumin is not possible to be brought up as a korban whatsoever. However, when it comes to the case of an egel, his mind is to bring a korban shlomim, and therefore he's torud in that mitzvah of bringing a korban shlomim. If he makes a mistake ultimately to bring it as a korban pesach, Rabbi Meir says that's considered to be toyeh b'dvar mitzvah, and he's chayiv a korban pesach, and he's chayiv a korban chatos. Ask the Gemara, boy minei rovim Rav Nachman. Now he wants to understand Rabbi Meir's shita a little bit further. How far is Rabbi Meir's kula in his definition of toyeh b'dvar mitzvah? Chulin l'shum pesach mali omar Rabbi Meir. What would Rabbi Meir say about an animal that's not yet consecrated? If he brings such an animal as a korban pesach, would Rabbi Meir say that he's also potter from the korban chatos? Because there also you would say that he's toyeh b'dvar mitzvah. Omar lei poiter hayab Meir afilu chulin l'shum pesach. And ochanami, yes, Rabbi Meir would say even in a chulin, even an animal that's not yet consecrated, if he brings that as a korban pesach, even Rabbi Meir in that situation would say he is potter from a korban chatos. I asked the Gemara, V'omar Rabbi Yochanan, but Rabbi Yochanan instead, Moidai Rabbi Meir bebalei mumin, as we quoted before, that Rabbi Meir does agree to balei mumin. So seemingly he should also then agree over here by chulin and say one is chayiv in a korban chatas. So he makes such a mistake. Why do you make this distinction and say when it comes to chulin he would be potter? Answers the Gemara because balei mumin loy michlefi. Hani michlefi. When it comes to balei mumin, he's not going to then confuse the balei mumin. He knows by looking at the animal that certainly is not going to be something that can be viable as a korban pesach, whereby if he brings it, even Rabbi Meir would say he's not toyeh b'dvar mitzvah and he's going to be chayiv a korban chatos. Whereas when it comes to the chulin, there the animal looks like any other animal that's consecrated, whereby he would yes be potter from a korban chatos. The time of Rabbi Meir mishum ichlufiv lo ichlufiv. The Gemara further challenges, but is that the distinction that Rabbi Meir says that he makes the distinction between confusing it and not confusing it? That's the reason to explain why chulin he would say you're chayiv a korban chatos. The Omar Rabbi Bibi Amar Rabbi Elazar poiter Rabbi Meir afiluch egel shel zifrei shlomim sheshachtu l'shum pesach. We just quoted before that Rabbi Bibi says that he's going to be potter from a korban chatos when he indeed will then use a korban shlomim that's an egel. Why? Because he said the reason is not because of michlim, because of hitirto. Al matayma de Rabbi Meir mishum torid. So how can you now bring a different reason why Rabbi Meir will be poiter? The definition of his kula of tori b'davar mitzvah is only if it's tori b'davar mitzvah because he's torud, but not because of michlefi. Answers the Gemara, Amalei Torid Avga Deloy Michlaf, Michlaf Avga Deloy Torid. He makes a distinction and says, indeed, both things would be included in his definition, in his leniency. If it has either something that is michlif, like in the case of chulin, that itself is a reason to then say why he would be potter. And if it's a reason of a shlomim that is going to be his carbon, his personal carbon, where he's tarud, that's another reason to say that he is going to be potter, because both are included in being tarud, in being toyer rather, in dvar mitzvah. But if it's going to be a balmum, which is not torid, and he's not going to be michlef, then there's no reason to say that he would be potter. Gemara now brings Yosiv Rabbi Zeiro veRabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchok Ikilo the Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchok. They were sitting on a roofed porch that belonged to Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchok v'Yosiv v'Kom Amri. V'Yasiv v'Kom Amri, and they're coming to sit, and they were saying the following halacha. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and then Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, in the subject of Toyeh b'dvar mitzvah. They said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish the following: Nischalef loy shefud shel noisar b'shvud shel tzli va'achlu chayev. Here there was a confusion. They had a spit, a skewer of noisar, of meat that was left over. They also had a spit of meat that was roasted from a carbon. Now, the roasted meat of a carbon, one's obligated to eat. It's a mitzvah. The meat of noisa that's left over, the pasuk says as follows: "V'oichlov avoinoi yisa." The one who eats them, the noisa, leftover meat, his sin will be carried. Ki es kodesh Hashem chilel. He then profaned the holiness. V'nichresa nefesh ahi me'amel. He'll have kores. So a person who eats then the noisar will be chayiv kores. So here, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, instead of eating the meat that was kodesh, they were supposed to eat, the tzli, he ended up eating the noisar instead. Rabbi Shimon says he's going to be chayiv for that, even though he made a mistake. Rabbi Yochanan comes and says, Ishtoi nida boal, a man who cohabited with his wife, who was in a state of nida, chayiv. Yevimtoi, again, this was something he accidentally was cohabiting, not knowing that she wasn't a nida. Yevimtoi nida boal, if he accidentally was cohabiting with his yevama when she was in a state of nida, again, not knowing that she was in a state of nida, then potter. So how do we understand Rabbi Yochanan's word? The Gemara brings now two different explanations. Either it comes to either strengthen the words of Reish Lakish, who said when a person eats the noisar instead of eating the meat that is kodesh, he's going to be chayiv. Or it comes to argue on Reish Lakish as follows. There are those that say that the meaning of Rabbi Yochanan is as follows: Kol shekain bi'ahi demechayid lo asa mitzvah. When it comes to the case of ishtoi nidoi, who is boal, that's chayiv, then kol shekain, Rabbi Yochanan was coming to say, how much more so when there's no mitzvah whatsoever involved in one who makes a mistake and eats noisar, he would be chayiv. Is the amrei b'ahi poter. However, there are those explain that Rabbi Yochanan came to say that he'd be potter. In fact, he's coming to then argue on Reish Lakish and say that indeed he would be potter. This is the shita of Rabbi Meir, because he attempted, and that's enough to do the mitzvah. That's enough to be potter. Whereas in the case of Ishtoi Nida, who was Baal, the Gemara will explain, that itself is not already considered to be even an attempt of doing a mitzvah, and therefore he's going to be chayiv. Gemara asks right away, my taima, why is this going to be potter? Hasam answer the Gemara, hu dehavale lishiyule, aval hacha dehavale lishiyule. Loi. When it comes to over there, in the case where his wife was a nida, he should have asked her if she's in a state of impurity. And therefore he's going to be chayiv. Whereas over here, there's nobody to ask. He simply confused the meat from the meat that he should have eaten to the noisar. The Gemara explains, Rabbi Yochanan, my shna yevimtoi. If that's the case, then why is yevimtoi different? There we said he's potter. The ka'avid mitzvah. The Gemara says because he did a mitzvah. Ask the Gemara if there he's potter because he did a mitzvah by then being boiled his yevama, even though he did not know that she was a nida, but he's still mekayim his mitzvah. Then ishto nami ka'avid mitzvah. Then his wife also, it should be considered to be him doing a mitzvah. In other words, the mitzvah of piri v'rivya, of having children. Answers the Gemara, Be'ishta mu'uberes. His wife was mu'uberes, she's pregnant, and therefore there's no mitzvah piri v'rivya. But asks the Gemara, but still, even if there's no piri v'rivya, v'ha, ika simchas oina, there's still the intention of being mekayim the mitzvah of simchas oina. That means to say that there's designated time that a husband is obligated to be with his wife, and therefore he's mesameach her with the mitzvah of oina. That's a mitzvah. Answering the more shaloi b'shas oinaso. We're talking about wasn't shas oinaso. Wasn't during these times when he's obligated to be with her. Ask the Gemara, but still v'amar rove chayiv adam l'sameach isha b'dvar mitzvah. A person is still obligated to be with his wife in certain times. Take a look at Rashi. It says Rashi, l'sameach es ishtoi afilu shaloi b'shas oinaso. Even if it's not during one of those designated times where he's obligated to be with her. If he sees that she desires him. Back in the Gemara says, we're talking about samach levesta. We're talking about where she was close to having the time within that period, that day of having her period of menstruating, whereby that's now not a time where he's going to then be obligated to fulfill that mitzvah of being with her. In fact, he shouldn't be with her then. And therefore, the Gemara makes that distinction and says that that's not a mitzvah even. Ihochi asked the Gemara, afilu yevimto nami. Then, if it's samach levesta, then even yevimtoi should be also considered to be chayiv. Why did it say potter there? Answer the Gemara, yevimtoi boziz mina, ishto le boziz mina. When it comes to the yevimtoi, he's embarrassed to ask her if she's in a state of impurity. However, with his wife, he's not embarrassed, he's not ashamed to ask her, and therefore, when it comes to his wife, he's going to be chayiv. When it comes to the yevama, he'll be potter. Now the Gemara wants to understand Shitas Rabbi Yochanan, who makes this distinction of Toye b'dvar mitzvah. Rabbi Yochanan Kiman, like who does he follow? What is his Shita? Ileimak Rabbi Yosi. If you're going to say it's like the case of like the Shita of Rabbi Yosi, this not like this in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yosi Omer. Yom Tov Harish Shel Chag, the first day of Sukkot, in regards to then shaking the lulav, Lios b'Shabbos, when it comes down to be on Shabbos. And there was an obligation to shake the lulav on Shabbos. This is the time before there was a takana. And in his interest to be medaktek in the mitzvah of dalim minim, he went out into the Rishus Harabim with his dalim minim in order to then show or ask a baki how to then mekayim the mitzvah of dalim minim. Potter, he's potter because from taking it to the Rishus Harabim. Because why? He did so by Rishus, to perform the mitzvah. He was interested in performing the mitzvah. So therefore, maybe this is the sheet of Rabbi Yosi that Rabbi Yochanan ascribes to. Says the Gemara, Dilma shiny hasam, Dizmanoi bohu. Maybe there it's different because the reason why it's going to be toye b'dvar mitzvah is because he had an obligation to perform dalin minim on that day. If it was already nighttime, he would no longer be able to perform that mitzvah. Whereas when it comes to the mitzvah of being boil yevimtoi, that he doesn't have a specific time. Any time he can do that, and therefore he's not bol b'mitzvah. The Gemara suggests that Rabbi Yehoshua d'Zvachim. Rabbi Yehoshua in our Mishnah is Zvachim. There, Rabbi Yehoshua says, if you take an animal like a korban shlomim and you designate it to be a korban Pesach, there he says that you're going to be potter Rabbi Yehoshua because he's toye b'dvar mitzvah. Says the Gemara, Dilma hasam nami zmanoi bol. There also the zman is bol, and therefore, since he has to bring a korban Pesach on Yud Dalid, That's why we say he's bol, he's able to then be, it's going to be Torah b'dvar mitzvah and he's potter. But in a case of Yevimto, again, he's not limited to a certain specific time frame, whereby there he would not say. Ve'elik Rabbi Yoshua de Tinoikos, asked the Gemara, but maybe Rabbi Yoshua de Tinoikos. There we brought the case where he had two Tinoikos. One infant was 8 days old on Shabbos. The other one was 8 days old only on Yom Rishon, on Sunday. And he went ahead and he gave a bris milah to both of these tinoikos on Shabbos. Here, the way Reb Meir explains Rabbi Yoshua, that he would be potter. Why? Because there he's going to be toya b'dvar mitzvah. On Shabbos, he has in mind to be mal the tinoik, and he makes a mistake, and he also is mal the one whose 8th day was only the next day, and even though he does not perform a mitzvah, Rabbi Meir explains, if he's toya b'dvar mitzvah, even if he does not mekayim the mitzvah, he doesn't oisa the mitzvah, still he's potter. The Gemara says also, Hasan nami zman bol. There the zman is bol, because it has to be the 8th day. Ve'elok Rabbi Yoshua the truma. Maybe, therefore, it's Rabbi Yoshua the truma that Rabbi Yochanan ascribes to. What does Rabbi Yoshua say in regards to truma? As follows, this nan, it says in the Mishnah, Haya oichil betruma v'noida shehu ben gusha ben chalutza. Here he thought he was a kohen when he ate the truma, and afterwards it became known to him that indeed he was a halal, he was a ben gusha ben chalutza, who was somebody who was posel from eating truma. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev keren v'choymesh. Rabbi Yoshua pointed. Rabbi Eliezer says it's chayev not only to return which he ate the keren, but also to add a choymesh, a fifth. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua says poiter, he's only chayev to return the keren, but not the choymesh. Says the Gemara, Dilma ki Rabbi Bibi bar Abaye, because the Omar Rabbi bar Abaye betruma be'erev haPesach disman bowl. Again, maybe that's different because the truma on erev Pesach, that's a time when you want to eat the truma, so you don't have to come and burn it. So therefore, he's bohul. But again, in case of Yevimto, he's not bohul. Inami, alternatively, even if you want to say it's not talking about erev Pesach, we can explain why it's different truma. And you can't say Rabbi Yochanan goes like the shita of Rabbi Yoshua in truma, because shiny truma the ikre avoida. Truma is different because truma is called avoida. The avoida rachmana achshar, and the Torah says that when it comes to avoida of somebody who was a halal, it's kosher. This nan haya'oy meiru makri v'noida shu ben grusha ben chalutzo, a person who was a kohen, who did the avoida and he was makriv, and then it became known to him that he was a halal, he was a ben grusha ben chalutzo. The din is kol hakror bonus kulon shehikrev al gabe mizech psulin. According to Tanakama, it's posel. However, Rabbi Yeshua machshir. Rabbi Yeshua says even though he was a halal when he brought the carbon, since it's avoida, it's kosher. So too over here by the truma, since even though it was a halal, it's still kosher because it's considered to be avoida. V'amrinon, and we say, my time Rabbi Yeshua, what's his rationale? D'chsiv, he brings a posuk. It says in the posuk the following. The posuk states like this. It says at the end of one posuk, it says Yasimu ketara ba'apecha, referring to the kohanim. They will put the ketara ba'apecha, lighting the ketaras, the cholil al mizbachecha, and they will consume it on the mizbeach. Beirach, the next posuk says Beirach Hashem Cheloi, Hakadosh Baruch Hu shall bless his belongings, referring to the kohanim, upoyal yodav tirtze, and his deeds, Hakadosh Baruch, and his tirtze Hashem you shall desire. And here it makes a drasha, the word cheloi of his belongings refers to halal. So I'll read the Gemara inside. The Gemara says, "Va'amrin on my time to Rabbi Yeshua." D'chsiv, it says in the apostle, "Beirach es Hashem cheloi." Again, chelo is a drush of halal. Upoyel yodav tirtze, and you'll desire his deeds, his handy deeds, his handy work, which means his avoida. So there, Rabbi Yeshua learns that the halal's avoida is accepted. The truma heicha ikri avoida. Now the Gemara says, but how do we know that truma is called avoida? Granted, the avoida by halal is mukhshar according to Rabbi, is kosher according to Rabbi Yehuda. But how do we know that truma, the eating of truma, is also considered to be an avoida? The Tanya, we bring the following brisa. Ma'aseh b'Rabbi Tarfon, who was a kohen. Shelo ba emesh lebeis hamedrash shacharis. He didn't come to the Beis Hamedrash the previous day, Matzu Rabbi Gamliel found him. The next morning, Rabbi Gamliel found him. Omar lo, he said to him, why were you in the Beis HaMikdash the night before? Omar lo, Rabbi Tarfon responded, I was involved with avoida as a kohen. Omar lo, Rabbi Gamliel says to him, Kol dvarecha einon ela divrei teima. Your words are a wonder. It's not clear. It's a mystery what you're trying to say. What do you mean to say that you were involved in avoida? We don't have a Beis HaMikdash. Where do we have a Beis HaMikdash avoida that you can say you were involved in avoida for not coming to the Beis HaMedrash? Omar lo, Rabbi Tarfon responded, Harehu oimer. Behold, it says in the Torah, on top of Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, it says in the Torah, Avoidas matona etenes kuhanaschem v'hazar hakarev yumas. Therefore it says that the avoida of the matana of your kahuna, that is to be brought. However, the non-kohanim who bring it shall die. And explains, Osu achilas truma bigvulin ka'avoidas beis hamikdash. That means the matnas kahuna, including the truma, bismanenu in the gvulin, when you don't have a Beis HaMikdash, is considered to be the avoida of the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore we see that truma is considered avoida, and Rabbi Yoshua says that avoida is kosher even for chalolim. So therefore we see over here clearly that indeed you can't say that Rabbi Yochanan ascribes not to the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua of truma either, because truma is different. Truma is unique, and the reason why over here it's considered to be something that is going to be potter is because it's considered to be avoida, which is accepted. It's going to be muksher according to Rabbi Yehoshua.